We're very excited to have Dr. Matt Frye here today. He is the Rodent and Structural Pest Management Coordinator with Cornell IPM and an expert in all things rodent. So today he's going to be talking about actions you can take this fall to exclude rodents from your home. Go ahead, Matt.
Great. Thanks, Amara, and good afternoon, everybody. As Amara said, we're approaching the fall season, so we thought this would be a great time to talk about keeping rodents out in particular. We did a previous First Friday where we talked about the other critters that might get into your home in fall, like some of the overwintering pests. But today we're going to talk specifically about rodents. And the ones that I'm referring to mostly today are going to be this cute little guy down here on the left, the Peromyscus mice. This refers to both the white-footed mouse and the deer mouse. That's two different species of mice that occur outdoors naturally, but in sort of fall through spring, they will come indoors to nest and look for food. And then the Norway rat as well. This is a critter that prefers to burrow in the soil outdoors, but will forage indoors for food and can nest indoors as well. Um, Other folks might deal with the house mouse. This critter is very common in commercial settings like grocery stores, unfortunately, multifamily buildings, where they establish themselves for long periods of time. But they don't tend to move in and out of buildings in the same way that the Peromyscus mice and Norway rats do. So we're really going to focus on these two guys, bottom left and right. And why exclusion is so important is that the typical approach to rodent management that we might think of with just trapping or baiting only removes individuals from the population and doesn't provide long-term solutions or prevention. So for example, if you're living in a home and you see rodents come in indoors, we have this introduction event. We do some kind of intervention to remove those animals. Maybe you live trap them and put them outside. Maybe you use a trap or bait. In some manner, we kill those individuals. But if we don't do anything to address the conditions that attracted them indoors, meaning the food source that they're looking for or the nesting source they're trying to find, or we don't exclude them, we experience what's called the rodent control treadmill, where we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. We'll have a new introduction, we'll kill some individuals, then we rebound and repeat the process again. So trapping, baiting, and other lethal techniques harvest individuals, but what we want to do is prevent them from coming in with exclusion. So today I'm going to zip through our top 5 rodent exclusion tips. And the first one is to understand what a rodent entry point is. So I'm going to share a quick video and you should hear some sound. Hopefully it's not too loud. Entry points for rodents are based on the size of their skull. So obviously that was a pet mouse or a lab mouse that was trained to go through this maze based on the availability of food. But you could see that as long as the animal gets its head through an opening, it can wiggle the rest of its body through to get to where it wants to go. So in terms of opening sizes, there's two different size references to keep in mind. The first is if a rodent is trying to squeeze itself under a door. That opening is 1/4 of an inch for mice or 1/2 an inch for rats. So the typical size reference that people give is that if you can put a number 2 pencil under a door, a mouse can squeeze under that opening. And this is because the skull height is about a quarter of an inch or greater. Now, for round openings, the skull is actually wider than it is tall. So for a mouse, it's about the size of a dime, and for rats, it's about the size of a quarter. So that is what we have to think of or look for when we're thinking about rodent entry points on the exterior of our homes or the buildings where we work. The next thing that we want to do is understand what are the common entry points that rodents will use to enter a home or other structures. Now, we might look at a doorway and think that it is tight and sealed against different types of pests. This could be the case for a garage door that comes down or an entryway door that swings open or closed. But to a rodent, that door may still be wide open. So if there's that quarter-inch or three-quarter-inch gap on the side of a door and there's light coming through, that could permit rodent pests to enter. Those gaps allow food odors to escape. As our nighttime temperatures get colder, if there's warm air escaping from that opening, that could be attractive to rodents. And during the summer months, when it's very hot outside, if there's cool air emanating from that gap, that would also invite rodents to enter the structure. These gaps are commonly associated with doors around a structure, but they can also be from ground level to roof, depending on the rodent species we're looking at. The Peromyscus mice are excellent climbers. They can squeeze themselves between downspouts and a house. They can get into openings that are part of the exterior of a building and climb all the way up to the attic level. So we need to think about those openings not just at the ground level, but all the way up to the second or third story in some cases. Other important openings for rodents include utility penetrations, maybe where your electrical wires come in, maybe data wires from your internet service. If there's a spigot for water to come out of the home, there might be an opening around that. And also transitions where we see the change from one building material to another. So here you can see the cinder block foundation, and then right above that is going to be a sill plate where it transitions to the wood building materials of the home. And that wood, if there's a moisture issue, can break down. There could be other movement of the structure that creates gaps for pests to get in. So anytime there's a transition between building materials or an addition, it creates an opening that rodents can use. Foundation vents and basement windows are also places where rodent pests can get in because they're often overlooked. Sometimes they're covered by vegetation, and we don't notice that there's been something chewed into or a shift in the building over time. We want to evaluate and classify those entry points. So for rodents, they'll actually leave us some important evidence to tell us that they're using a particular pathway. Traveled entry points may contain droppings from the rodents that they're using as chemical cues to either remind themselves or tell others that, hey, there's a really good food source if you go in this way, or hey, this is the way that I traveled back and forth to my nest site. Rodents have oil on their fur that's from secretions by their sebaceous glands. So they have this sebum that can be deposited. If you look at this picture closely, you can see this area here that I'm highlighting with my mouse is a little bit darker and has sort of an oily stain to it. That's from rodents moving in and out over time. And you can obviously tell that something is happening to this door sweep here because it's been chewed by the rodents. So gnaw marks and other ways that they got into that, either through pushing or gnawing, provides evidence that they're using that actively. If it's an area like a crawl space where there's a dirt floor, you might actually see footprints to tell you that the rodents are getting inside. So here's two examples of sebum, and I like to point out this important difference here is that not all rodent evidence means that there's an active infestation. One of these is old evidence that's from a long time ago. It's dried and there's no longer activity going in and out. So the active one is the one on the right. It's sort of oily and viscous looking, whereas the one on the left is dry and would flake off. In both cases, we'd want to seal the openings that allow rodents to enter, but it tells us that on the left, there's no longer rodents moving into this structure. So if we want to look for and classify those openings, we have a great resource on our website that tells you how to do an exterior inspection. It talks about the importance of maintaining contact with the building the entire time that you're walking around. This may require you to go under a porch or other difficult to access areas so that you could see openings that would allow a rodent to enter that would often be missed by someone just taking a general walk around the perimeter. This form has a spot where you can draw a map of your home and you can maybe identify where you found those openings that are the size of a number 2 pencil or the size of a dime. The next and most important step that we want to consider is to select rodent-proof materials. So not every product that you see for sale at a big box store or even online is actually going to be rodent-proof, that it will keep out rodents. Rodents have an incredible ability to gnaw through a variety of materials, so we want to make sure we're selecting the right product for the right place to keep those pests out. We have a really great website that we've developed over the past couple years that you can find at pestexclusion.org. And there's a drop-down section there on material selection that has a number of articles that you can read about for openings that are 1 to 4 inches, less than 1 inch, and all the different types of products that can be used to seal those openings. So for most homeowners, the holes that we find are generally about 1 inch or smaller. These are things that are easily overlooked that maybe before you didn't think a rodent could enter, but after today's presentation, you realize that it's enough for even a rat to get into your home. So there's some very basic materials that we can purchase to use for those openings. The first is metal mesh fibers. And I want to really highlight here that I'm not talking about steel wool that you can just buy at the grocery store or the hardware store. These are metal mesh fibers that are either made of copper or stainless steel metal mesh. And the importance of that distinction is if we just use steel wool, over time that will rust, it'll become brittle, and can be pushed or pulled out by rodents. Whereas the copper mesh and the stainless steel metal mesh actually maintain their shape, keep a tight plug, and don't allow the rodents to push or pull on that material. We also can consider elastomeric sealants. And again, here I have to make a clarification that we're not talking about a standard caulk. Regular caulks will dry out and pull away from the edges of the material that they're bound to. Elastomeric sealants will keep their shape. They're more flexible. And so if the building shifts or over time there's a change in some condition that would otherwise make a caulk fall out, the elastomeric sealant will persist. And then escutcheon plates are something that can be used on the interior to prevent rodents and other pests from gaining access into a bathroom or kitchen if we put them around a utility line that comes inside. Importantly, we need to affix these to the wall, often with an elastomeric sealant, so that it stays in place and isn't easily pushed away from that structure. Now, if we do find openings that are larger than 1 inch, we have to rely on different products. So hardware cloth is something we can easily buy at a big box store. It comes in 2 different sizes, usually a 1/2 inch or a 1/4 inch hardware cloth. And based on the sizes that we refer to for rodent entry points, 1/2 inch hardware cloth will exclude mice. 1/2 inch hardware cloth will exclude rats, and 1/4 inch hardware cloth will exclude mice. But we need to make sure that we're attaching these correctly to a structure. We want to use some sort of fastener that doesn't leave an edge. We can't just rely on staples. It has to be tightly affixed to the structure. For doors, we want to make sure that we're using a rodent-proof door sweep that will not allow a rodent to chew through it in a single night. So you could see here one brand that was installed, although this installation would still create a gap for rodents to enter. So we need to make sure that we're installing these devices correctly. There are a few considerations when we are thinking about pest exclusion, and the first is permeability. If we're thinking in our mind that we want to seal up our home and keep every single pest out, sometimes people think of sealing them airtight, but that's not how structures work. So if you have a brick facade on the exterior of your home and you sealed this gap here with a sealant, you would then create moisture issues in your home because water cannot escape that intentional opening. So we want to make sure that we're not sealing certain openings that are required to breathe, like these weep holes or soffit vents that are on the roof line. Those need to be sealed with products that allow airflow but prevent rodent entry. We also might want to think about pest pressure. So the rodent-proof products can be really expensive. If we don't know if we have an infestation or a lot of rodents coming in, maybe we start with the cheap product and see if they've chewed through it. Then we switch to the more expensive product. And we may need to think about the environment that we're using that material. If it's in a location that gets constantly wet or over time is exposed to a lot of direct sunlight, we may need to consider other products that are more durable and last longer. So the final thing that we want to consider is that we're not just doing exclusion in isolation. If you have an active pest problem at home, you want to integrate exclusion with control measures. So this is just one example of a situation where there were peromyscus mice. Trapping was used initially, and the location of these numbers refer to where traps were set, and the number refers to how many mice were caught on that particular snap trap. You can see from this hand-drawn diagram that there were traps set up around the entire perimeter of this basement, but all the captures took place in this one area. So that really allowed us to hone in our inspection and figure out that there was an entry point somewhere near there. We could still trap to reduce the population, but then also look for that entry point that we could seal after we've eliminated all the mice. So the take home here is that life will find a way. If you have a home or a building that you work in and there's an opening, if there are attractive conditions like food odors or cool air emerging or warm air emerging, the rodents are going to explore and they may come in and they may establish themselves. So we want to implement pest exclusion to keep them out. And remember that exclusion is our best chance at prevention. So just using traps and baits, we can't prevent them from getting inside, but if we use proper exclusion, we will prevent them from entering our structures. And here's one little deer mouse making his way inside. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time. Let's see, we might have 1 minute for questions here. Just two additional links that we'll share in the chat are mice and rats page from the Cornell IPM website, and then that pest exclusion resource again. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. It looks like there's a question about the best way to seal a garage door.
Good question. So there are a variety of products that are garage door seals. They are rubber gaskets that have pest exclusion material inside them. And that rubber gasket is really important because as the door comes down, it adjusts to the size of the opening and creates a nice tight seal that prevents airflow in and out, and then also is rodent proof. there are products as well that go on the sides of the garage door to ensure that rodents cannot get in on the sides of those garage doors, which is a very common opening. But all those products are available for sale.
And I think you hopefully have a quick answer to this question. Are there any essential oils or scents that rodents do not like and may prevent them from thinking about entering?
Another good question. So there's a lot of products on the market that are targeted as rodent repellents. Unfortunately, the science hasn't shown that those products are effective at repelling rodents over long periods of time. So there may be an initial repellency, but if it's the choice between having a meal and smelling something that you don't like, the rodents are always going to choose to eat and survive. So unfortunately, there's no simple fix with just using repellents.
And do you have any tips for preventing mice from getting into cars?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's one that we're working on. We're trying to develop some resources for that. Cars are so varied in their design and where rodents actually get in, that it's difficult to provide recommendations. Some cars, rodents will jump on the wheel well and then access parts of the car that way. In other cases, they'll jump right into the car from the ground level. So one thing that I've personally been doing is using trail cameras to observe their behavior, and then I could place traps accordingly to where they are jumping into the vehicle. But I think it's more of a case by case basis on how to manage those critters getting into the car.
I think this is another really good question, so we're going to make time for it. Is
Sure.
spray foam adequate?
Another good question. So if you go to that material selection section of our website, you will not see any information on spray foam. Um, It's a great product if you are trying to maintain an indoor environment by reducing air leaks, but it is not pest proof. So mice, rats, if you're using it on upper parts of a building, squirrels, raccoons, all those critters can easily chew through that material. And in many cases, mice and rats will actually use that as nesting material. So it's a great insulator, but not in situations where we're trying to exclude rodent pests. So I think in the essence of time, we'll stop there. And I have the pleasure of introducing our IPM Minute speaker today, and I'll let her bring her slides up. Our IPM Minute speaker today is my colleague and co-host, Dr. Amara Dunn-Silver. She's the biocontrol specialist with Cornell IPM, and today we're talking on our third installment of the Feed Friendly Insects program and preparing to plant. So take it away, Amara.
All right, thanks so much, Matt. If you have joined us for step one or step two or both, you might remember that we are talking about friendly insects. And by friendly insects, we mean pollinators like this cute bumblebee here, and insect natural enemies of pests like this lacewing larva. So both of those are considered friendly insects. We're talking about feeding them, but these insects also need shelter and protection from things that might harm them, for example, pesticides. The food that we're providing to these insects is in the form of pollen and nectar from flowers that produce a lot of pollen and nectar, or sometimes the other small insects that get attracted to the flowers that produce lots of pollen and nectar. I have this QR code on this slide, and you'll see it on another slide as well, and we'll put the link in the chat. This is a page that we've made with lots of information about how to create habitat for friendly insects, and so you can find a lot more details here. This series is mostly about providing you some reminders around the different steps that we're doing. I also am focusing in this series on establishing perennial flowers that feed friendly insects. You can use annuals too, but we're talking about perennials here. It can take some time to establish them, but they can result in really beautiful flowers, as you can see in this picture. We have already talked about making a plan for how you're going to manage your weeds over the summer to get the weed seed bank down. In August, Betsy talked about picking plants, and today we're talking about getting ready for your planting, which we'll talk about next month in October. And then in 2026, we'll talk about some of the maintenance steps. So our goal here is to increase the chance that your perennials will survive. Hopefully you've been doing some weed management throughout the summer and now you want to do that final soil prep before you're going to do your fall planting. If you're transplanting, you want to make sure that you weed just before you do your transplanting so that you're giving your perennial wildflowers a head start. And you might want to think about mulch if you have some mulch available. If you're planning to direct seed this fall, you want to create a really good seed bed. And by that, I mean you want to loosen up the soil, remove any weeds. You want to maximize the contact between the seeds and smaller particles of soil. Again, we want to give our flowers that we're planting an advantage and a head start over the weeds. And that's it. Uh, so next month in October, we'll talk about the final step for the fall, which is actually doing your planting. I have some links here for more information and also how to contact me as well.